happy that everybody stayed around to the end here. So I just want to first acknowledge that today I am presenting on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, the Dakota and Dene people, as well as the homeland of the Métis Nation of here in Canada and on Treaty 1 territory. For EvalIndigenous and EvalAgenda2020, I just wanted to express, and I'm sure we're all aware of this, is that the Eval Partners' vision is that evaluation is an integral part for all of the efforts of government, civil society, and private sector to improve the lives and conditions of all citizens. And this goal is across and embedded into EvalIndigenous. Also the vision of that evaluation has become so embedded in good governance that no policymaker or manager will imagine excluding evaluation from the decision makings and dare to hold an important meeting and reach out to important decisions without having reviewed relevant evaluation information. So within EvalIndigenous, so we have very strong values and strengths and hold a very large component of Eval 2020 goals in our practices, and we value the strengths of Indigenous evaluation practices and the contributions of Indigenous evaluators within the entire global evaluation practice. So we document the evaluation and research protocols developed by and for Indigenous communities and organizations, facilitate learning and sharing of experiences, and we want to promote innovation in approaches and any methodologies that are used in Indigenous evaluations, not solely for evaluations done by Indigenous people, but to incorporate Indigenous evaluation practices within the norm of evaluation realm. Our task force, there are multiple of them. There are two, but one of them is to work within the global evaluation context so that Indigenous voices and sovereign tribal governments are better represented throughout the world of evaluation activities. In a brief story, we received only minimal funding compared to all of the Eval partner groups, and we are trying to make it very noticed to Eval management and Eval 2020 that we do have the right and the voice to be heard as Indigenous evaluators. So we wanted to express as a collective how we frame ourselves within the evaluation world and our methodologies. So we use our 4 directions that are taught from our elders. So the first is to the east, and when we're talking about the east, we're always talking about our visions and our awareness and how we can see ourselves within the global context or within our community context. So we talk about who am I or who are we, and we ground ourselves in our culture and in our language. And we always want to include everybody into the environment, as well as how we fit into that environment. To the south, we always are looking for understanding and how we relate to it in the context of timing. So we ask ourselves, what is the community context? Why are we here? Why am I here? Where are we at? And where am I at? And this is known mainly as participatory development or participatory evaluations, and this is also included within the EvalIndigenous framework. To the west, this is our logical side, and so we always discuss the processes and methods. So how we talk about how am I going to actually do my work, and how do we do our work together so that we can include decolonization aspects and decolonization Indigenous methods and theories to ensure that these are used throughout all of our methods. And to the north, this comes from our wisdom and our experience and our past, and looking and listening and feeling with our elders and our lived experiences because of publications and books. They can't talk back to you. And we ask ourselves, what do we do with our work? So what do we do with our evaluations, and how does it actually make us better in the communities? How does it create a better community through doing evaluations and having people who are in the communities doing their own evaluations? So I wanted to briefly step out and talk about how does EvalIndigenous truly connect with EvalAgenda 2020. So the first that we have is for EvalAgenda 2020 is their flagship program number 1, which is that they strengthen national evaluation systems. And so what we are doing to incorporate, to strengthen the evaluation system, is to develop an inventory of Indigenous evaluation practices in the global evaluation context. So we are seeking out to speak to any and all individual or community-based Indigenous evaluation practices to be able to connect together and have a hub and a system together so we can connect and share our wisdom and share our knowledge rather than it being segregated. Then we want to increase the recognition and understanding of Indigenous contexts for evaluation by the global evaluation community, from practitioners to commissioners of evaluation. And this is so that people are aware that Indigenous communities, Indigenous evaluators are out there, one of them being a youth, and we have a different understanding and a different way of thinking, and this can be incorporated into all sorts of practices. There are Indigenous people all over the world, and we have a different view. So we also want to facilitate and create spaces to promote Indigenous people's self-determination of their evaluation agenda. And this is so that, just like youth evaluators, we have a voice, and we need to be able to be proactive and determine our own paths within the evaluation world. So for EvalAgenda 2020, their Flagship 2 program is about Evidence Matters campaign. So to support the evaluation community effort for strengthening their own local Indigenous practices, and this is so that local capacities can do their own change. We believe that you must go from a grassroots approach and not have external people coming in to do the evaluations, that we can in turn have the evaluations come from within. So we have to share and disseminate the local Indigenous evaluation and research protocols developed by Indigenous communities and their organizations. So we have an Indigenous guiding light. And I see here someone asked, how can we learn more about Indigenous evaluations? I will get to that. To promote the voices of Indigenous evaluators in the local evaluation context. That is their goal. And our practice for that and our outputs and activities to do that are to promote innovation in approaches and methods used by Indigenous evaluators. And here's to answer your question. So I wanted to look at, and we wanted to look at, how there can be stronger interlinkages between EvalIndigenous and EvalYouth, as there are many youth, including myself, who are Indigenous, and I am the only youth in EvalIndigenous. And there are 2 levels. The one level is the individual, and the other level is at the collective level. So at an individual level, youth can seek out EvalIndigenous online. We can meet EvalIndigenous leaders in our own communities. We can attend sweat lodges, we can have smudges, and we can have other Indigenous learning sessions to speak to our elders that are in the communities and learn about the Indigenous culture that exists in your own community. We can also put pressure on the eval partners together from EvalYouth and EvalIndigenous as one to increase Indigenous equality within eval management. Youth can seek out local evaluation groups and connect with Indigenous leaders within those groups. So an example, in America, they have the American Evaluation Society, or in Canada, here we have the Canadian Evaluation Society. Youth can learn about decolonization practices in their own communities. So a lot of it is about learning and delving yourself into Indigenous knowledge, and people will learn very quickly that there are a lot of similarities instead of differences. EvalYouth, as a corporation, as a collective, can align itself with EvalIndigenous when at meetings with eval partners. EvalYouth can send emails to eval partners to put pressure for equal opportunities for EvalIndigenous. EvalYouth can join a conference call. We have conference calls all the time with EvalIndigenous to learn about our activities and our outputs and our outcomes and our impacts that we hope to achieve. EvalYouth can have a representative on EvalIndigenous to increase its sustainability. EvalYouth can adopt decolonization practices into their own activities and their own events. EvalYouth can include and teach EvalIndigenous in social media techniques. One of our learning we need to have occur is that we need better social media, and youth are very good at media.